Good afternoon, everyone. We've still got people coming in from the waiting room. But while we get started, we're excited to have this session. They don't call it industry with Laurie Clark, who will introduce herself momentarily, our presenter for today. Just to cover a couple of housekeeping aspects. If you do have any trouble with Zoom, it might help to use the your phone to call in for audio if you're having trouble hearing. So turning off your headset or computer speakers and calling in by phone instead, or sometimes logging off and logging back in using your institution's single sign-on, making sure you're logging in with your institutional profile might help you get in. And if all else fails, the phone number for tech support with ASU's Research Technology Support RTS is available on the screen. We are recording this session today and it will be posted, and we would love to have your feedback. So I think this has been popping up in a couple of different ways. Ideally, when you leave the session, there will be a pop-up and it will just take you right into the survey for the session today. If not, it may pop up with a URL that you'll need to copy and paste into your browser. So you can head on over to the brief survey. We'd love to have feedback for the presenter for the session today, but also for the conference overall, so that as we're planning the next conference, we'll have all of those ideas and suggestions and feedback to go from. We also have here an acknowledgement of the land that all of our universities are sitting on. So we've been approaching this in a couple different ways. I shared the University of Arizona's acknowledgement in the last session I did. So today I'll do the NAU's and go ahead and review that for us. So Northern Arizona University sits at the base of the San Francisco Peaks on homelands sacred to Native Americans throughout the region. We honor their past, present, and future generations who have lived here for millennia and will forever call this place home. And with that, I will go ahead and turn the rest of the time over to Laurie.
Thanks, Jessica. Thank you for joining me, everyone. My name's Laurie Clark, and I'm a research administrator with the College of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Arizona. And I've been a research administrator for just over 6 years. And prior to my career in research administration, I spent a full career in industry over 25 years. And so today we're going to cover some topics. First topic is, why would we want to partner with industry? We're going to talk about the motivations, what motivates industry, what motivates the university to want to work together. Talk a little bit about context to help you understand how industry operates. Talk about some pinch points, and there really are pinch points. It's not a super easy integration. Give some examples of budgets, because as research administrators, that's where we live. And then finally provide some resources. So why would we want to partner with industry? There are lots of reasons to partner, but probably the main one is that it can be mutually beneficial to both an academic partner and an industry partner. And one thing to know is that when industry is thinking about partnering with an academic institution, it may not be an immediate match, because we're not in the business of business and they are. And so it takes a little bit of a stretch to think about partnering with an academic institution. Industry is really interested in, when they're thinking about working with an academic institution, they're very much interested in the long haul. So they probably aren't going to want to talk to us about one-off proposals. They are going to be interested in long-term relationships so that they can really gain the benefits of that relationship. So some of the benefits are expertise, and it goes both ways. They really are interested in our expertise in research, and our researchers can really benefit from their expertise in the market. Research opportunities are expanded when you work over the long haul with any partner, just because you have a track record of working together, and sponsors really like that. So there are more opportunities the more you work together. Revenue generation, of course, is at the top of the list for industry, but it also matters to us. We are interested in revenue generation opportunities. Market insights, that's really from an industry perspective, having access to research is giving them a front seat view of that they can apply to the market. And for a university, having insights into the market may help direct research, because you kind of know where things are going, where they're headed. And finally, educational opportunities. We are in the business of education, but from an industry perspective, they're looking for talent. And if they have access to students, say they're sponsoring a capstone project or something, they're going to meet those students, and that is of great interest to them because they're looking for talent. And so it's also great for students because it's an avenue towards employment. So what are the types of partnerships? Pretty much there are two. We have university as lead or industry as lead. And there are other types such as nonprofits or a municipality. They could be considered a lead, but for discussion purposes, I'm going to lump those two in with industry because they operate very much in the same way. And of course, then we have federal and non-federal sponsors, and the way that you operate, the way that you partner very much depends on what the sponsor is and who the lead is. Industry is motivated by money, as you might guess. It's pretty simple. It all comes down to money. They're going to be interested in growth and profit, and some industry partners may be interested in social good, but truly that all goes right back to money. They are interested in financial stability because without financial stability, they cannot exist. And that may be the one thing that we share in common with them in terms of motivation, because without financial stability, we can't exist. But we have a slightly different set of motivations. We are in the business of education. We are in the business of innovation. And to a certain extent, we are in the business of the greater good. It's not all butterflies and roses, but generally we have a more altruistic sort of motivation. We are money driven, but that's not our sole motivation. Context is an important thing when thinking about industry. And when I first started working as a research administrator and I heard the term industry, this is what I thought of. And I continue to think of industry this way. I never said that I worked in industry. Instead, I said I worked in the private sector. Other people might say they worked in business, or they worked in corporate, or they might refer to their specific sector, like I work in tech or I work in healthcare. But generally, anybody working in industry is probably going to think of this. Now, the people working at this place might say, yes, I work in industry, but generally that's not what people, this is what people think of when they think of industry. So I just get back. And again, context is important because there are a lot of similarities between industry and academic work, but there are differences. And this image here of this bottle is an example of something that has a lot of different names depending on what part of the country you're from. And industry and universities are similar. There are a lot of names that kind of mean the same thing, but there are some differences. So it's just good to have context and understand, you know, where those similarities and differences occur. So with industry, or with the university, it's called industry, right? And we'll refer to it as industry because that's what we call it. But again, it could be the private sector, business, corporate. PI is not a common term, and I would go so far as to say it's not used at all in industry. Instead, you might have a project manager. You might also have something called a principal, and that is not a principal investigator. That's the owner of the firm. Budgets are referred to as fee proposals. In industry, a budget is the thing that you work from once your award is in hand. But you submit a fee proposal and you don't submit a budget. F&A is loosely overhead. ERE is referred to as fringe, and that's an easy one because we also call it fringe. MTDC and TDC really are unknown terms, and I'll go over a few budget items or a few budget examples to show you how it's done, but those are unknown in industry. Cost share is something that industry can wrap their head around. They're not familiar with it as part of a fee proposal. They'll understand it, but they're not going to be too excited to provide cost share. So just something to know. The important thing to know about industry is it operates similarly, but differently. So relationships are the foundation of business, and relationships are really important. They're the grease that makes the wheel go. And no project can move without good relationships. So that as research administrators, because we're on the front lines, I think we have we're the first one, other than the PI, we're the first experience that industry might have with the university. So just know that relationships are important, and communication with an industry partner goes a long way. A little bit about how projects are done by an industry partner. It's similar, but different. So there's three things that really any project done by industry is going to have in common. They are the scope, which is what you're doing, the budget, which is how much it's going to cost, and the time, which is how long it's going to take. We also deal in these things, but probably the biggest difference is the scope of work. Industry is going to spend a lot of time to detail that scope of work, and it may be pages long and exhaustive. And the reason is because those are the definitions of what they're going to do, and they are in the business of making money. So if anything goes off that scope of work, they're going to knock on your door and say, hey, this isn't in my scope. I need more money, or I need more time, or I need both. And they're going to manage that very closely. An old boss of mine once referred to these three items as a three-legged stool. And I thought that was a good analogy, because he said, you know, if any one of these is off balance, the whole thing is just going to fall apart. And or, you know, if one leg is longer, you're going to have a stool that won't balance. And in the same breath, he also said, you can have two of the three, but you cannot have all three. And I thought, you know, that was really true. It's very, very difficult to manage a project that comes in on budget, on time, and within scope. But just know that that is what industry is really focused on. They're trying to balance that stool. So my mouse is very sensitive. So what are some of the pinch points? The biggest pinch point, I think, with working with industry is that we don't do it very often. So we have lack of experience from working together. And there's also a lack of understanding about how the other entity operates. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just something to be aware of so that you can get ahead of it. And I think of it as a bit like apples and oranges and chalk and cheese. There's similarities, but there are differences. So what are the main pinch points? Looking through this list from the bottom up, the bottom up, we've got COI, export control, dissemination of information, and IP. Those are all very contractual types of issues that are unique to universities. And so you need to speak about them early and make sure that everybody is in agreement on those fronts, because there is something called a go, no go decision point that is not going to be considered a negative. Like if you can't do it, you can't do it. Or if it doesn't make sense, why would you do it? So I think industry is really going to want to know if there are any go, no go decision points, because they're investing money like we are, but they don't want to waste their money. So talking about these things early really makes a lot of sense. Depending on who is the lead, if industry is the lead, they may be concerned about tuition remission. And they may be concerned about F&A. So at the University of Arizona, F&A for an industry partner is not our standard negotiated indirect cost rate. It is 62.5%. So it's higher. And tuition remission, they're not going to really understand why we would pay that. So that's a discussion to have up front. Flipping the tables, when we're a lead and F&A, tuition remission goes away if we're the lead because they won't have it. But when we're the lead, and let's talk about federal sponsors, not non-federal, but on federally sponsored projects, we are familiar with the F&A, your NCRA. They have two choices generally for F&A, their NCRA or the 10% de minimis. So most industry partners do not have a NCRA, and that can be a real bump in the road, because if you don't have a NCRA, then you're looking at the 10% de minimis. That 10% can be considered, they may say, great, 10%, because they're thinking of that as profit. 10% is a number that's often used for profit, and it's a line item in their budgets. If an industry partner chooses to go with the 10%, it's really worth it to walk through with them how that's applied, because they are not going to be familiar with how we budget and how that is applied. And indeed, they may be thinking it's profit, but it's not. There's another interesting way to budget F&A that's not talked about a lot, perhaps, and that's the simplified acquisition threshold. This is a way to you have an industry sub-awardee on your project where they don't have a huge chunk, but the simplified acquisition threshold allows an industry partner to provide a fixed fee, and the threshold is 250,000. So that would be over the whole project. That's not by year. But if you have an industry partner that's going to be less than 250, that may be a way to go, because then indeed they can apply their overhead, all their things, and they just provide us a fixed fee and say, here you go. So that's a useful tool for smaller industry partners. A few examples of budgets, just to give you an idea of how it's different. On the left is a budget as we all know it. All the parts and pieces, how we do it. On the right, and this is a budget for 500,000, my darn mouse, 500,000. And on the right is a budget for 500,000. What's important to note on the budget on the right are a few things. First is the hours, the way that the effort is expressed. So we often work in person months. Industry works in hours. That's their currency. You'll notice that the hourly rate is quite high, and that is because an hourly rate is a rolled up rate in industry. So it includes their overhead, which overhead for industry actually includes fringe benefits. And they will have a line in there for profit, and they're going to cover all their bases. And I remember when I first started working in industry, I was billed out at a rate that was about 3 times higher than my salary. And I thought, wait a minute, why isn't all that money coming to me? You're billing me out at that high rate. And I didn't understand at the time that it was rolling up all those costs that are real into my hourly rate. And so this is how industry presents a budget or a fee proposal. Also worth noting here is what's above the line and what's below the line. So labor is above, and then we have something called reimbursable expenses. So reimbursable expenses include things that basically that you can get a receipt for. So travel, printing, shipping, those are common ones. And reimbursable expenses are definitely below the line, and the idea behind that is that as we incur these expenses, we'll charge them back to you as reimbursables, but we're going to add on a little bit to cover our costs in managing those expenses. So typically it's between 10 and 15%. This example is how we might take our budget, which is on the left, and turn it into a fee proposal that could be understood by industry. So this idea is basically rolling up our numbers. So on the left, we have our 1.2 person months. On the right, we have 209 hours for the PI. On the left, we have $15,000. On the right, we have $32,151. That $32,151 includes the ERE and the FNA. So if we run down the list, everything is rolled up. So what we don't see here is an FNA line. We don't see an MTDC line. Those are just included in the fee proposal. And that will be very familiar to industry. Whereas if we did include an MTDC or an FNA line, that would cause confusion. Another way that, like what I'll call a fee proposal, when industry makes a fee proposal, they're often tying their effort to tasks. So that's very, very common. And by doing that, by breaking out their effort according to task, it actually makes it easier to manage. And I think that we as universities could take a few cues from industry in terms of both managing projects, but also budgeting so that you can manage them. Because when you just have this big ball of money, I think it's actually kind of hard. And I think breaking out by tasks makes a lot of sense. There's a couple, I showed some different tasks here with different breakouts just to show how you might present these to industry. The one thing that I will say is industry is respectful of not showing all your cards. So you might actually be able to say, hey, task one is going to cost $152,000 and some change, and they may be fine with that. Now, depending on the solicitation, they may need to ask for more detail. So task two is showing a little more detail. We're not breaking out the labor. We're just saying, hey, labor is 120 and it all adds up to 163,000. And then task three would be what I'd call like a detailed breakout where we're giving the hours and the dollars. They can do the math, but they're not going to see how our F&A and our ERE is split. So just know that they will be respectful of not telling the whole story because they don't tell the whole story generally. And that, backing up a little, that can be a pinch point if we need a detailed budget for them. Some industry partners don't want to share budgets. And that can be a lot of no fun because you need to submit a detailed budget, but they don't want to share it. So contracting, once an award comes in, you go to contracting. And I will say that industry is going to be very familiar with all types of agreements. We have fixed price agreements, we have cost reimbursable agreements, we have master agreements. All of those are going to be very, very familiar. And probably the one difference is, our IP, our export control, those kinds of things, those will be a little different, but the form of the contract will be very familiar. So that typically is not a pinch point. So what does success look like when working with industry? I think it really comes down to relationships and knowing that industry is looking for long-term relationships. What we want to do is manage well so that we're delivering as advertised and having a lot of communication so that each gets to know the other because it is difficult to work together because we operate differently. And so spending the time to communicate and really understand does make a difference. And over the long haul, you also develop a nice level of trust. And it can be fun to work with industry partners once you know that you're on the same page. And working repeatedly over projects is actually kind of cool. So when I signed up to do this presentation, I had never heard of this organization. It's called the University Industry Demonstration Partnership. And a few people told me about this, which is really cool that this exists. It's all about enhancing the relationships and the working together for universities and industry partners. And I think the reason it exists is because it's not easy. So they have a really great website, just very interesting and thorough. So if you're at all faced with working with industry or you're interested in research development and industry partnerships, I think this is a really great resource. And they had, I'm going to share a little video that they put together, and this quick guide I'll share, but it's a great resource. This is for PIs primarily, but I think as research administrators, all the information is relevant to us as well. So.
Laurie, if I can pause you right there, if
Yes.
you click the options for share screen, there should be one to share your computer sound, and then we can hear what the video is playing.
Sure. That might be. I'm not sure.
Might be advanced sharing options, or let's see.
Here's my. Where would that be?
So if you go to your share screen, there might be a ... view options.
Optimize for video clip. Let's try that.
About his relationship with a new faculty member at Georgia Tech.
That worked, thank you.
That faculty member also talked about what happened when he worked with this company, and they talked about how little knowledge they had about working at the university-industry interface, and they talked about all the lessons they learned during the time of working together. So we created the Researcher Guidebook as a way to help those faculty members, those researchers at universities, as well as the lab scientists in the companies, get a better understanding of what it's like to work together. And it has two parts. One is written for academic researchers, and one is written for industry bench scientists or lab managers. And it talks about the top issues that affect university-industry collaborations. And it was really meant as a way to give them insights before they enter into a relationship, to avoid many of the problems that would happen downstream. In addition, we have a quick guide, which is a short version, an executive summary, that gives just the highlights. We've given out many of these, and this is really meant as something that can be given out liberally to faculty members and researchers and companies as a way to share that initial information about working at the university-industry interface.
So I have downloaded both of those, and I'll share them, but I think they're really good resources, and especially if you have PIs who are thinking about working with university as a partner, it would be a really valuable thing to have in hand to share. So I knew this was going to happen. So now I want to open it up for questions and chat if anybody has anything.
While we're waiting for people to think about what questions they ask, thank you, Laurie, for your presentation so far. And just a reminder to everyone to please share your feedback through the survey that will come up when you leave the session today. Okay, we do have a question. Can you share the link to the guide that was on the screen?
Yeah.
We could drop that in the chat.
Maybe I could just drop in the guidebook, drop in. I'm not able to drop it into the chat.
And if it doesn't work to share it in the chat, we can
I'll
share it offline
after.
and post it with the slides and the
Yep.
video of the session.
I think I'll have to do that.
That's no problem.
Okay, well, if there are no questions, I just wanted to end with a thank you. I appreciate everyone attending and enjoy the rest of the conference.